My name is Earl Willis Jr. I'm from the Warren County Public Library, and today is February 14th, 2017, and we're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And today I'm interviewing Mr. Arnold Franklin. Mr. Arnold Franklin, I'm going to ask you a few questions. We're just going to start off with kind of a basic question.
Okay.
Where and when were you born?
Well, I was born in Franklin, Kentucky, no relation, in August 22nd, 1944. My father was in Germany at the time, and the women were all in a house there together, but that's where I was born. And we moved to Bowling Green when I was in the 6th grade. And I attended College Street Elementary School and then Bowling Green Junior High and Bowling Green High School. And I graduated in 1962. And I immediately entered Western Kentucky University. I'd always wanted to be a fighter pilot. And one day when I was taking a physical to play sports at Bowling Green High School, my family doctor knew that I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And he said, "Artie, you're going to have to figure out something else to do because you have a heart murmur." And he said, "There's no way that you'd ever be able to pass the flight physical." So I gave that up, and I enjoyed industrial arts woodworking. Okay. We had a teacher there, Mr. McCubbin, who was my hero. And so I graduated from Bowling Green High thinking that I want to go to Western, and I want to become an industrial arts teacher, and I want to be just like Mr. McCubbin. But I had taken physics in high school, and I really enjoyed physics, so I started majoring in physics. So then I decided I was going to be a physics teacher when I graduated. Well, I graduated from Western Kentucky University in 1966. It was the height of the Vietnam War, and I knew that as soon as I graduated, my classification would change immediately to 1A, and I was going to be drafted. And so I didn't want to be drafted, so I went down to the local Air Force recruiter and told him that I would like to sign up for the Air Force, and I wanted to sign up for a career that was as close to aviation as I could get, because I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and I couldn't because I couldn't pass the flight physical. And so he told me about being a weather officer. And so I joined the Air Force, and I'm going to be a weather officer, and I went to officers training school. And had been there just a very short time, and they split us up into our flights. And the flight training officer that I had was a guy by the name of Captain Ramon Alonzo. Now, everybody says, or will see, someone in their life that completely changes the direction that they're going. Sometimes it's for good, sometimes it's for bad. But in this particular case, Captain Alonzo one day went around the room to each one of the persons. By the way, Captain Alonzo had been detailed over to OTS. He was down at Wilford Hall, the big hospital there in San Antonio, Texas. He had ejected from an airplane and had hurt his back. And so he was being evaluated to see if he could fly ejection seat airplanes again. And so anyway, he went around the room and he said, "Why aren't you a pilot trainee? Why aren't you a pilot trainee?" And some guys had thick glasses and it was obvious, but he came to me and he said, why aren't you a pilot trainee? And I said, "Well, I'd love to be. I've always wanted to be a fighter pilot, but and I told him the story of my doctor and what he had said. And he said, "Have you ever taken a flight physical?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "But would you like to be a pilot?" I said, "I'd give my right arm." And so later on in the day, he came to me and he said, "You be dressed and you be ready at 6 o'clock in the morning at the dorm there." And he said, "I'm going to take you over to Wilford Hall and you're going to get a flight physical." I said, "Yes, sir." 6 o'clock next morning, he pulls up in front. I get in the car and we're driving over there. And he says, "Now, you don't need to say anything about having a heart murmur." He said, "If you've got a heart murmur, they'll find it." I said, "Yes, sir." So I went over and I did the flight physical. I did an EKG. They didn't say anything about a heart murmur. I didn't say anything about a heart murmur, and I passed. And just like that, my career field in the Air Force changed from going to be a weather officer to going to go to pilot training. Okay. And so I went to pilot training at Williams Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona. Did very well. Graduated very high in my class, second as I recall. And I got my first choice, and that was to go fly F-111s at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada, the mecca, if you will, for fighter pilots in the United States Air Force. And so I went to Nellis Air Force Base, and I became an F-111 pilot. And I was there for several years, And then I was selected to go to Southeast Asia and be a French-speaking FAC, a forward air controller in Cambodia when we weren't in Cambodia. And so I went to French school at the Defense Language Institute, West Coast branch in Monterey, California. And I learned to speak French. And so I went to Southeast Asia. And I was stationed at Ubon for a while, and I was a rustic FAC. That was the call sign. And I flew in Cambodia when we weren't in Cambodia. And the reason I took French is because the Cambodians spoke French as their second language, because French Indochina, French used to own that part of the world. So I flew there for several months. And then we got a call and said, we need FACs to go up to NKP and fly on the trail over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. They needed some guys. I guess they had lost some guys, and we need more guys up there. So I volunteered for it, and I went up to NKP, Nakhon Phanom, NKP for short, and I flew the rest of my tour out of NKP over the trail, doing rescue missions into North Vietnam, flew missions in South Vietnam. I was what was called a laser paved nail, a FAC that had a laser on board that we used to guide laser-guided bombs. And so I flew all the rest of my tour being a paved nail guy, flying OV-10s, lasing for bombs dropped by primarily F-4s. When my tour was up, I requested to go back to Nellis Air Force Base to rejoin the F-111s, and I got that assignment. So I returned to Nellis and started flying F-111s again.
Well, what year is this? Late 60s?
Yeah, 1970, I went to Vietnam, and then I came back. And then I got recurrent in the F-111, and I returned to Southeast Asia, this time flying F-111s out of Tak Ly Air Base in Thailand. The bombing of North Vietnam had finished, and so all of my missions in the F-111 out of Tak Ly was flown primarily over Cambodia, dropping bombs at night, supporting the folks there who were the insurgents who were fighting in Cambodia. And so I finished my tour there. I returned to Nellis Air Force Base and was an instructor pilot in F-111s when I got a call from MPC, Military Personnel Center, asking me if I wanted to go to graduate school. I had, as I said earlier, had majored in physics and math when I went through Western Kentucky University, and they asked if I wanted to go to AFIT, Air Force Institute of Technology, and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, and get a master's degree in laser physics. And went home, talked with my wife, and we decided, yeah, we'd like to do that. And so next thing I know, I find myself at Dayton, Ohio, attending AFIT. And I got a master's degree in laser physics. And as a result of that training, I received a directed duty assignment. And so I went next door to the Air Force Materials Lab, and I worked in the office that developed laser-hardened materials. We developed concepts to harden Air Force sensors and aircraft against an enemy high-energy laser. And I did that for 4 years. And then I went to Air Command and Staff School in Montgomery, Alabama, and out of there, my next assignment was to RAF Lakenheath, England, flying F-111Fs. So I'm back in the cockpit flying F-111Fs.
If you don't mind, the role, is it Royal Air Force, RAF? Is that what it stands for?
RAF, Royal Air Force.
Yes, sir.
Royal Air Force Base, Lakenheath in England.
Okay.
And I got there in October of 1980, and I stayed for 6 years. That's a very long time, but I started out as an instructor and operations officer of the 495th Squadron, which was what's called an RTU, a replacement training unit. It was a fighter squadron, but it also did all the training for all the F-111 pilots and navigators that arrived at Lakenheath. And I was the operations officer for that squadron, as well as the RTU replacement training unit chief. And I did that, those two jobs for 4 years. And as my 4-year assignment was up, I had an assignment to the Pentagon. And the wing commander called me in and asked me if I would consider extending for another 2 years so that I could be the commander of the 493rd Squadron. I said, I gotta go home and talk to my wife about this, because we got 2 kids that are now back in the States going to college, and she's ready to go back to the States. So, and I didn't know whether my wife would want to do that or not. As it turns out, before I could get home and talk to Mickey, my wife, the wing commander saw my wife in the BX exchange parking lot, and he knew Mickey, and so he went to Mickey and told her what our conversation had been and what I had said, and he said, I need Arnie to stay for another 2 years to be the commander of the 493rd. So when I got home, my wife says, well, I see we're going to be staying at Lakenheath for another 2 years. So that's how I ended up staying another 2 years, for a total of 6 at RAF Lakenheath.
If you don't mind me asking, I've asked other people that's flown or been in combat, could you maybe explain what it would be, what it's like when you're in combat? How do you get through your mission? What is your thoughts? Is your and there's a quote that I've read that you said, and you said, generally speaking, when you have air-to-air combat, he who sees the other one first wins. Can you explain it to the people that we're interviewing?
Yeah, as I said, my first assignment there was in OB-10s. And it's not a fighter. But you put in, find targets, and then put in air, if you will, on those targets. And so there was no air-to-air combat associated with that. But the biggest threat was being shot down from somebody on the ground, because you're flying around all the time within range of people shooting at you, and they really shoot at you, especially when you start shooting at them. And that's has a way of focusing your attention. All of your senses become high. You remember everything. You remember what you saw. You remember what you heard. You remember what you smelled. I used to tell people that when I flew the Libya raid, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, that I could remember what it smelled like in the cockpit as I'm sitting there waiting to take off. Doesn't mean it was a bad smell. It's just an airplane has a smell about it. And I can remember what that was like. But back to Vietnam, they shot at me a lot, and all you can do is just do the best you can and hope they didn't hit you. Unlike guys on the ground, it wasn't like it was a hand-to-hand combat. We flew the mission. You went back to NKP. In my case, you maybe took a shower, maybe you went to the gym and you worked out a little bit, went to the bar, had a few briskees with your buds, went to sleep in a nice warm bed, got up the next day, flew missions. We flew, as OV-10 pilot, I flew just about every day. About every 5th day you would have off. But I flew about every day. But it wasn't that bad. I deployed to South Vietnam a few times and saw combat down there, and it was pretty hectic, especially when the North Vietnamese came across the DMZ, and now you're working with guys on the ground that are getting shot up, and you're trying to support them by putting in air all the way around them, hoping you didn't hit them. So that was good. Some of my most intense and memorable missions were missions that I flew on SAR, search and rescue. Guys would get shot down over the Ho Chi Minh Trail out in Laos someplace, and I, as a paid male pilot, we had special equipment on board our airplane that allowed us to find and go to people. And as a SAR commander, a search and rescue commander, I would launch with Sandys, A-1s, as well as with HH-53 helicopters that were going to be used to try to extract them, pick them up. and I would lead this force of A1s and HH-53s to the guy that's on the ground because I could find him. I could go back to him, and I'd talk to him on the radio and tell him this is what's going to happen. And then I would get out of the way, and then the Sandys would do their thing about sanitizing the area so that the HH-53s could come in and hover and then pick the guy up. Now you lead the mass of airplanes back to NKP, and now you go to the bar, and there's the guy that you picked up, and he's buying everybody that he can find a drink. And so those are some of my most fulfilling missions that I flew. Enjoyed that. But as far as you read stories about guys on the ground and the combat that they had, flying airplanes, it isn't like that. It's very intense for just a little bit of time, but then it's as if you're in a Air Force base back home.
Yeah.
So it's not that bad. Enjoyed it. It was fulfilling in the sense that I knew when I got there the war was lost. As far as the U.S. was concerned, we were just getting out. And I just wanted to survive my year assignment there and do my assigned duties, not get shot down, and come home.
Yeah.
I remember one of the first things the squadron commander said to me, not me individually, but to a group of us that had arrived. He said, your main goal is to fly your mission, serve your time, and not get shot down. I don't want you doing anything to shine your ass and get shot down, because that means now we got to come in and try to get you out. So he said, don't do that. So that's the way I conducted myself for the year that I was there.
Yeah. So when you said he who sees the first other wins, can you maybe explain that?
Yeah. When you fly an airplane like an F-111, where you are possibly, now the F-111 was not an air-to-air combat airplane. And when I made that statement, it was something that was taught to us very young as a fighter pilot, and that was you have to make sure that you try to see the other guy first, because you go back to the days of World War I, many stories of guys getting shot down because the enemy airplane came up behind them and shot them down, and they didn't even see them, didn't even know they were there. The same was true now as much as it was then. He who sees the other one first usually wins, because he can then maneuver his airplane to get into a window where he could fire a missile or shoot a gun or something like that. So he who sees the other one first wins. And that's why it's so important in today's world with the stealth airplanes that we have. While the enemy can't see you first, you see him first, so you get the first shot because he doesn't know you're there.
You have the advantage.
You have the big advantage, super advantage. That's why it's so important with these stealth airplanes, that technology that we have. So that's what that means. He who sees the other one first usually wins, oftentimes wins.
Yeah, it's all about mindset. When you say mindset.
Yeah, and coming in second in an air-to-air fight is not good.
No,
not good. And just to clear the air, I never flown air-to-air combat because I never flew in a fighter airplane where that was their mission.
Okay. Now you were going to talk about the Libya raid. And that's what I really wanted to talk to you about. Maybe can you give the history for those that don't know about what built up to Gaddafi? What was the build up? Can you maybe explain the build up?
When I was stationed at Lakenheath, there were all kinds of terrorist attacks that were taking place all around the world, except in the United States. The United States had not experienced any kind of terrorist attack. There was no 9/11. There was no anything. There were countries who were sponsoring. It's called state-sponsored terrorism. They were funding these terrorist groups, and it was taking place, like I say, all over the world. Airports in Europe, in the Middle East.
So Germany was a big,
Germany,
yeah.
big problem. France, big problem in France. All the countries in Europe, not so much in the UK, and none in the United States. And so the American people didn't understand what this was. They read about it in the paper, but it didn't affect them. So it was something that you just looked at the headlines, maybe read the first paragraph, and that was about it. But we were there at Lake Heath. F-111 was a very capable airplane, capable in the sense that it could carry a lot of ordnance a very long way. And we sat on several contingencies there at Lake Heath that I probably can't talk about today.
It's understandable.
Where if something happened, then we were going to do this. If something happened, we were going to do that. And we sat there on that capability. And then President Reagan was elected. And he had made the statement that if at any time that there were any Americans hurt or killed in any kind of terrorist activity, and he could prove that who was responsible, who did it, that the United States would respond. And so it was New Year's Eve of 1985. I was on Victor Alert. The F-111, as I said earlier, was a very capable airplane. It was capable of carrying nuclear weapons a very long way. And so we had airplanes there at Lake and Heath that set what was called Victor Alert. Victor Alert meant airplanes that were loaded, cocked, ready to launch on a moment's notice with nuclear weapons to a pre-assigned target. And so I was on Victor Alert. We had crews that were assigned to do that. We couldn't leave the base. We had to stay close. We had beepers. We didn't have cell phones in those days. All we had was a beeper. Beeper would go off. We'd go back, run to our airplane, start it up, and we'd sit there and wait to listen for the message from the command post. And the message was either launch, strike your assigned target, or this was a test. This was an exercise. And when it was an exercise, then you would recock your airplane, shut it down, and you go back into the alert facility, which was right there. We slept right next to where the airplanes were in an alert facility. And so, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I meant to put that on mute. Okay, it's on. Let me get a turn. So on New Year's Eve, I'm the Alert Force Commander. The senior guy that's on alert is the Alert Force Commander. He's responsible for all those guys. And I was, at this time, a squadron commander. And I was senior to any of the other guys. And so I was the Alert Force Commander. And so it was New Year's Eve. We'd been to the officers club. And at midnight, we had kissed our wives. Of course, when you're on alert, you have to drink what they call a Victor Alert Coke, which is just a Coke, nothing in it, you know. No liquor, obviously.
Yeah.
But I had sang Old Lang Syne at midnight, kissed my wife, she was there, and then I got all of my, it's like herding cats, I got all of my Victor Alert guys, and I said, okay guys, time to go back. So we left the O Club, everybody was partying, and we went back to Victor Alert, and I went to bed. About 2 o'clock in the morning. Now it's New Year's Day. Phone in my alert facility rang, and it was the wing commander, Sam Westbrook. And he said, Arnie, I need you to get somebody to replace you on Victor Alert, and you need to be at the base operations at 5 o'clock. And I said, what for? And he said, you'll find out later. It's very, very unusual to replace a crew who is on Victor Alert. It's unheard of to replace one at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I didn't know who in the world I could call in my squadron to replace me that would be sober at 2 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Eve. So I called my operations officer and told him what the problem was, and he said, I'll be right there. And so Dan came, and we changed out the airplane, signed all the paperwork, and I went home and woke up my wife, and I said, help me pack a bag. I got to go TDY to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. She said, what for? And I said, I don't know. I'll find out when I get there. How long are you going to be gone? I don't know. Help me pack a bag for 3 or 4 days. So I packed a bag, threw my doc kit in there, shaving kit, changes of underwear, 3 or 4 flight suits. I put in a pair of dress blues, except for the jacket. It was a blue shirt and blue pants, the standard Air Force uniform, but I didn't take my blues, the blouse jacket, what's called the Class A's. So went down to base operations, and I got there a little before 5, and there sat 3 other officers. Muddy Waters, he's a weapons guy. Bob Pastucci, who was the chief of our radar strike, and I'm having in mind bar here. Who was it? It was Muddy, Bob Pastucci. Oh, and Tom Yax, who was our director of operations. He was a colonel, and me. And so, what are we doing here? Nobody knew. We knew we were going to Ramstein, but we didn't have any idea what it was for. And so, in just a little while, a C-130 lands out of the mist and pulls up there in front of base operations. The back door ramp lowers. This guy comes out. We walk out there, and he looks around, and he said, "Is this it?" I said, "We guess." So the 4 of us got on this great big C-130, and it took off and lands at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, which is the headquarters for U.S. Air Forces in Europe, USAFE. And so bread truck comes up. That's what they used to haul people back and forth from the flight line. We get in this van, and it takes us up to this building, the USAFE headquarters, and we're led into this room. The room's about the size of this, pretty good sized room, had flat tables on it, like mission planning tables, and there were maps spread around. And we stood around for a few minutes, and in comes 2-star, who is the director of operations for USAFE, General Forgan. And he calls us over to this table, and on this table is a map of Libya. And he said, your mission is to plan an attack against these 3 targets in Libya. And he said, this is on the morning of the 1st, and he said on the 3rd of January, I want you to prepare a briefing on how you would do that, and on the 3rd of January, where you're going to brief General Bernie Rogers, who was the Army 4-star SHAPE commander. He was the commander of all forces in Europe, Army, Navy, Air Force. He was a commander of all of those. Called him SHAPE commander. And so he said, you got any questions? And Muddy Waters, I forget Muddy's first name, but Muddy was his nickname. Everybody has a nickname. My nickname is Rooster. Everybody has a nickname. So Muddy said, yes, sir. He said, what's the objective? And General looked at him and said, what'd you say? And he said, what I meant, sir, is what do you want us to do? He said, as the weapons expert, he said, I need to know whether you want to blow up buildings. I need to know whether you want to crater the runway. Do you want us to kill people? What do you want us, what's the objective? And he said, we want maximum visible damage. We want minimum collateral damage, meaning we don't want to hurt anybody that we can't help. And we want to minimize the risk to Air Force crews. Any more questions? I said, no, sir. So he went away. And so we planned how, I know, I asked, do we have approval to fly across France? And he said, assume that you do. And so we planned the mission. We were going to take off out of Lakenheath with 6 airplanes. We were going to fly across France. We were going to hit a tanker down in the Mediterranean, join up with a tanker, refuel, get some gas, and then we were going to strike each of the 3 targets, not all of them together, but each of them separately. We planned an attack against each of these 3 targets. And there was no threat. We were going to do it at 2 o'clock in the morning. And there was no threat because Intel came in and gave us a brief and said, basically, this is the air order of battle. This is the defenses that they have. This is where they are. This is the type of AAA. These are the SAMs that they have, surface-to-air missile sites. But they said they don't operate them. They go home when it gets dark, and they don't even operate them. They don't even turn them on. So I, as an air crew, said, well, there's no threat except hitting the ground, because the 111 flew very low. We had automatic terrain following radar. So the plan was to hit the tanker, drop down to low level, strike the target, turn around and go back to the tanker, get some gas, fly back to Lakenheath. Takes about 5.5 hours. So that was the plan. And depending on which one of the 3 targets we were going to attack, we were going to either drop 500-pound laser-guided bombs, or we were going to drop 500-pound dumb bombs. If it was an area target, such as a ramp, where you had a lot of airplanes parked, which is one of the targets, we were going to spread the 500-pound bombs out over the area and blow up as many airplanes as we could. If it was a particular building, which some of them were, we were going to put a 500-pound laser-guided bomb into the building and blow up the building. And so that was the plan. And the reason we selected 500-pound bombs rather than 2,000-pound bombs is because of what General Forrigan had said: we want to minimize collateral damage. 2,000-pound bomb makes a big hole in the ground, has a large blast area, whereas a 500-pound bomb doesn't. Plus the 500-pound bomb is more accurate simply because it doesn't have as much mass that has to guide. And so that was our plan. And then it came time to build the briefing. And I said, who's doing the briefing? And Tom Yax, who was a colonel, he was the DO, Director of Operations, he said, you are. He said, if we fly this, you're the mission commander, you do the briefing. I said, yes, sir. So we built the briefing. And when you're going to brief the Army 4-star, you got to brief the Air Force 4-star. And you're going to brief the Air Force 4-star, you got to brief his staff first. And so we briefed his staff, and then we briefed General Donnelly, who was the USAFE 4-star, Chuck Donnelly, old fighter pilot. And so our plan was to take off with 6, and then when we got to the Libyan coast, if the primary 4 airplanes were good, then the 2 spare airplanes would turn around and go back up to the tanker and just wait. We launched 6 to make sure we could get 4 good ones to the target. And so that's what I briefed. And briefed General Donnelly, and I finished, and I said, sir, I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you might have. And he said, well, I got a couple. He said, why are you carrying 500-pound laser-guided bombs instead of 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs? I said, well, it's because General Forrigan told us to minimize collateral damage. He said, can you fly this mission with 2,000-pound bombs? I said, yes, sir. Airplane is fully capable of doing that. Big airplane, it doesn't care whether it's a 500-pound bomb or 4 2,000-pound bombs. He said, take 2,000-pound bombs. I said, yes, sir. And he said, which airplane are you in? And I said, the first one across the beach. And he said, that's what I figured. He said, how would you like to be sitting there with a good airplane strapped to your ass and fly that far and get to the coast and somebody tells you to turn around and go back? And I said, I wouldn't like it at all. And he said, neither would I. He said, launch 6. And if you've got 6 good ones, when you reach the beach, attack with all 6. I said, yes, sir.
So are you don't holding anything back, you're going all.
And so the next day, we fly across in General Donnelly's helicopter. We're going over to Patch Barracks, which is where General Rogers' headquarters is. And so we're in the helicopter, and we're sitting there side by side. And he said, you ready to go? And I said, yes, sir, ready to do it. And he said, you got any questions? And I said, well, yes, sir. I said, sometimes I'm kind of off the cuff when I answer things. And I said, I'm just concerned that if he asks me a question and I answer and I give him my answer, why, it's not the answer that you would want me to give. And I just concerned about that. And he said, tell you what, he said, if he asks you a question, he said, you pause just slightly, as if you're thinking of your answer. And he said, if I want to answer it, I'll answer it. If I don't say anything, you answer it. I said, yes, sir. And so we go in there, and unbeknownst to us, the Navy has been given the same task. And the guys who were flying, going to do the attack, flying the A-1Es, they're there. And they give their briefing first. And it's 3 targets, 2 in the Tripoli area and 1 over in the Benghazi area, which is an area closer to Egypt. Not nearly as big a threat over there as far as defenses as it is over around the capital, Tripoli area. And so he gives his briefing about how he would strike all 3. But this is what he said at the end. He said the F-111 is much more capable of penetrating heavily defended targets because of their terrain following radar, their onboard systems, their speed. And he said our recommendation would be to strike all 3 targets, with the Navy striking the Benghazi area and the F-111 striking one of the targets over there next to in Tripoli. So it's my turn. And so I get up and I give the briefing. Oh, by the way, I told you I had not taken a blouse. And so all of a sudden I'm going to brief the Army 4-star, and they want me in my dress uniform. Well, I don't have a dress uniform. It turns out Tom Yax, the DO, the colonel, he had brought his service dress. So we took his rank off, which is a colonel's rank, and I put my lieutenant colonel bars on there. And I briefed General Rogers, who's the Army 4-star, and I'm not in my uniform. I changed my name tag, but the ribbons are all from Tom Yax. But anyway, I briefed him. So I gave my briefing, and the briefing was over, and I'd say be happy to entertain any questions. And so a couple of staff guys asked questions. And then General Rogers said, yeah, I have a couple of questions. He said, why don't you have any, no, he said, are you asking for all the support you need? Is there anything else that you need? Do you need anything else? And I said, no, sir. All we need is we fly across France, need the tankers there to refuel us. We'll go in there and we'll strike 2 o'clock in the morning. We'll be in and out. They don't have any defenses. They're not even running their radars. They're not manned. So there is no threat for us except hitting the ground. And we're not going to hit the ground. So there's little to no threat. So I don't need any additional support. And he said, how many airplanes do you expect to lose? And so I paused. And General Donnelly, who was sitting right next to General Rogers, leaned forward and he said, well, sir. And General Rogers took his hand, sort of like this. And he said, with all due respect, General, he said, he's flying. I asked him. I'm thinking, oh, shit. I said, well, we don't expect to lose any airplanes. And I said, and if we expected to lose an airplane, well, we would figure out some other way to do it. And General Donnelly is over there, and I'm looking at him. He takes his thumb, and he goes like that, sticks his thumb up like, good answer. And so General Rogers says, thank you very much to both of us. Thank you very much for your briefing. Good job. He said, go back to your duty stations. He said, you'll be hearing from me. And so we got back on C-130, and it took us back to Lakenheath. And we kept 6 air crews on alert, if you will. We weren't allowed to tell them what they were on alert for, but we told them, if you leave the squadron where your work is, you take this beeper and you call the command post before you leave and tell them where you're going, what the phone number is, where you're going to be, and then when you get there, you call them from that phone so they know where you are. And then, for example, they said, if you leave to go home, call and say, I'm going home. When you get home, call them, tell them you're home. Here's the number you can get me at. And then When you leave home to come back to work, call them and tell them you're leaving to come back to base. And that's the way we lived for those 6 air crews. And we would select different air crews because a guy would go on vacation, or he would get sick, or he'd be grounded, or get a cold, or whatever. But we always had 6 air crews that knew that they were on alert for something, and they had no idea what it was for, because we weren't a very small planning group, because this was such a highly sensitive mission. And that's the way we lived. And during January, February, and March, they would call the wing with a top secret message adding another target. How would you hit this target? And so we would get our plan and we would send it back in a message. This is how we would hit it. What about this target? And we did that for 37 total targets. So when we actually launched, we had 37 missions on the wall in a package ready to go, depending on which one. I'm going to fast forward to April. And my wife, I had canceled a lot of trips that we wanted to go on. This was going to be towards the end of our tour. She wanted to go see the tulips. She wanted to go see this. She wanted to go do that. And I wouldn't leave because I was afraid that they were going to execute and I wouldn't be there. And so finally, there was an Officers' Wives Club tour to Paris. Finally, I said, okay, I'll go. And so I went to Paris. And I kept looking at I couldn't understand French by this time, but I kept watching the TVs to see if I saw anything scrolling across where something had happened. And there was a bomb that exploded in a disco in Germany. And there were a couple of Americans, I'm having trouble remembering right at the moment, but there were a couple of Americans that were killed right out. Hundreds of people were wounded, injured, other nationals, Germans that were killed, but I think it was a couple of Americans. Maybe it was one American and then he or she died later on, but it was a couple of Americans. And so I'm in Paris. I arrived back home. It was around 10 o'clock, as I recall, that I got home. I turned the light on. And as soon as I turned the light on in my quarters, well, the phone rang. And it was a fellow squadron commander, Slick Andrews. Slick, because he had a bald head. Slick was a squadron commander of the 492nd Squadron, a fellow squadron commander. And he said, meet me in the field. There was an open field between our 2 quarters there. And he said, we've been executed. And I said, you got to be shitting me. And he said, no, execute order arrived. He said, Air Force tasking is improbable because they don't have approval from Maggie Thatcher to launch yet. But he said, we're supposed to meet at the command post at 8 o'clock in the morning. So 8 o'clock next morning, that's a Saturday. I get up and I go down to the command post. And there was the team, and we're looking at the execute order, and there's 3 targets on there that said the Air Force was tasked to strike one of these 3 targets. 2 of them were the 2 targets that we had already planned, another one we had not, so they were feverishly planning on how we would strike that target. That target happened to be his compound where he lived. We had not studied that. We hadn't. And it's right in the middle of the city. We had never dreamed that they would task us to hit that target. And so we were feverishly trying to figure out how we were going to hit
Gaddafi, correct?
Gaddafi. Mm-hmm. Where he lived, his house, his command post, all of his key people were in this one area. It was a fenced-in, high-walled compound protected by his special guards that protected him. And so we were feverishly doing that. And so I said, okay, do we have approval to cross France? The command post from Ramstein said, assume that you do, plan you do. So we're planning on how many tankers we need. So the plan was, let me back this up. We had come up with a plan on how we were going to go strike those targets. And so the plan morphed into, we were going to take off from Lakenheath, join up with a tanker, a KC-10 tanker, in the UK, and fly across France with this tanker. And then the tanker was going to wait for us down in the Med, and then he was going to fly back, and we were going to fly on his wing with our IFF, identify friend or foe. That's a device on the airplane that radar can easily see you. We were going to have ours all turned off, so nobody knew we were going to cross. We weren't going to talk to anybody. And so we practiced that. We had a practice mission where we took off from Lakenheath with just 4 airplanes, joined on a tanker, flew across France, went down in the Med, did a simulated attack against a Navy boat down there in the Mediterranean, checked out our comm links with the Navy guys, and then flew back to Lakenheath and landed, and it went perfect. Not a hitch. And I remember thinking, just like at a play, you have the dress rehearsal, and you're the director, and everything went exactly right, and that was bad, because I'm thinking, well, maybe we just did the good one, But anyway, back to where we were planning, assume you have approval to fly across France. So we planned to take, we're going to take 6 airplanes down there, how many tankers we needed to get down there and do the thing and come back. And then all of a sudden, it's like you threw a snake, venomous snake in the middle of the flight planning room. We got a call that said your tasking has changed. You're to strike all 3 targets. We thought, oh my God. Plan. Now we got to go from 6 air crews to 26 air crews. Because we're going to have spare airplanes for each one of the cells. So the plan was each airplane, each flight would take off and join on its mother tanker with a flight of 4, 3 primary attackers and 1 spare. So those 3 airplanes were going to strike their target. So now we're going to launch 24, because we're going to 18 primary airplanes to strike, and we need spares. So we're going to launch 24. Now we got to pick the crews. And the wing commander got all of us squadron commanders, and he said, go over there in that room and come out with a list. So we went in the room, and I, being the senior guy, said, okay guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to select the 24 best air crews to fly this mission. And it doesn't matter if the 10 comes from your squadron and 6 from mine, or whatever it is. We're going to take off our squadron hats, and we're going to put on our wing hats, and we're going to pick the best in the wing. And so that's what we did. And we sat there, and each squadron commander said, okay, this is my best guys. These are the ones that are most current on night TFR, night toss. These ones be better not to drop laser guided bombs. These would be better to do this. And so we came up with a list and what they were going to do. And it was yellow. It was on a yellow legal size piece of paper. And I came out of the room and I handed it to the wing commander, Sam Westbrook. He looked at it for just a few seconds. He handed it to the DO, and he said, call him. Handed it to Tom Yax, the director of operations, and said, call him. And they called him, and they came in to the command post. And this is primarily the first time that the air crews were told what it was that we were going to go do. Do I have approval to fly across France? Yes, you do. Now we got to come up with a tanker plan on how to get all these airplanes down there and back flying across France. Then the question came up, well, what if we don't get approval to fly across France? What are we going to do? The answer came back, if we don't get approval to fly across France, you're going to fly all the way around Portugal, France, Spain, through the Straits of Gibraltar down there, and you're going to take 6 airplanes, and you're going to strike one of the 3 targets assigned. Now we plan on how to get all those airplanes, those 6 airplanes, down there in the Med, through there. This is a long way. Now we got to launch tankers to refuel the tankers, because we can't launch out of any place but the UK. So the tankers got to go all the way down there, pass the gas to us on the way. Now they don't have enough gas to get back home. So now we got to launch tankers to refuel them. And so it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so finally I said, we're going to have to ship or get off the pot. Somebody needs to tell me, what are we going to do? And a little bit later, phone call comes back from USAFE. They said, you want an answer? You got an answer. You're going to go around with all airplanes, and you're going to strike all 3 targets. There aren't enough tankers in Europe to fly this mission. So we're going to have to get tankers to fly from the United States or fly from somebody, from someplace, and land, and then launch on the mission. Finally, crews have been briefed. We go into crew rest, and at 2 o'clock on Sunday morning, I finally go home into crew rest. And when I went home to go into crew rest, there weren't enough tankers in theater to fly the mission. I go home, and they'd given us a sleeping pill. We had been before this. We had been given what they call go no-go pills. A go pill was amphetamine. What it would do is if you were on some kind of long mission or whatever, and you were getting tired, whatever, you could take this and you would feel much better. It's like an amphetamine pill does. And then there was the no-go pill. No-go pill was a sleeping pill. And we had been given these before by a flight surgeon, and then we were supposed to report our results. He said, go home. When you're tired, you're sleepy, you're ready to go to bed, take one of these no-go pills and see what it does and what's the results of it. And so we did. And so we had practiced those. So it was on record that the no-go pills were okay. So I went home and I took a sleeping pill, and I told my wife, if I don't wake me up at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so I can remember the last conscious thought before I went to sleep that night was, okay, we've planned this as well as we can, but what is going to happen to make this thing blow up in our face and just cause it all to just fall to crap? What am I missing? I couldn't think of anything, so I went to sleep. 10 o'clock next morning, the wife woke me up, and I told her that I was going to the squadron because we were going to be on an exercise, which was true. The wing was having an exercise. And so it wasn't unusual for me to do, it was unusual for me to do these hours, but it wasn't unusual for me to tell her that I'm going to the squadron, it's an exercise, and I won't see you for 12 hours or more. And so I got to the squadron about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the crews started arriving, and we started doing some more mission planning. And I won't go through all of that, but have you ever seen the movie 12 O'Clock High? 12 O'Clock High is an iconic mission about a movie about B-17s flying over Germany during World War II.
I think I have.
There's this scene in there where all the air crews are there after breakfast. They're in this big, huge auditorium, and there's an aisle down the center, and crews are milling around, and all of a sudden somebody from the back of the room says, "Room 10, hut!" Everybody comes to attention, and down the middle of the aisle comes the general. And they go up on the stage, and there's curtains up there, and they throw the curtains back, and they say, the mission today is Schweinfurt. And the crews are out there going, oh, that kind of thing. That was the atmosphere that was in this smaller briefing room, auditorium, in the squadron. It was auditorium seats. There was an aisle in the middle. And oh, by the way, up until this point, I thought this is another exercise. This is another one of those exercises that we've been sitting on. But this one has gone a lot further than any of the rest of them. But there was doubt in my mind. And then, so I got up. Well, let's back up. The weather officer got up and he briefed the weather. Intel officer got up and briefed the latest intel updates on the threat operation. Oh, by this time, the Libyans were operating their radars at night because of all this talk about the United States and what they're going to do, and Reagan says he's going to respond. And now Intel begins to tell us that they not only are seated at their radars and their enemy missiles and their AAA, but they're manned. And they're sitting there and they're turned on and they're operating their radars. And so we had added EF-111s to the package to jam these enemy radars. We had added, the Navy was going to support us with F-14 Tomcats in case a Libyan fighter launched to intercept us while they were going to shoot them down. And so it's a big package. EF-111s were going to launch out of Upper Hayford with their tankers. That's another base there in the UK where the EF-111s were stationed. And we were going to join up in this mass armada and fly down there together. And then I got up and I gave some mission commander kind of briefs about last minute details. The DO, Director of Operations, Tom Yates, he has some things to say. And then the wing commander, Sam Westbrook, gets up. He has some wing commander kind of things to say. And then he said, there's somebody else that has something, that would like to say something. And he looked to the back of the room. I'm sitting up there in the front row, on the front row right as the stage is looking out in the audience. That's where I'm seated. And he said, somebody else has something to say. And he looked to the back of the room up that aisle and he said, sir. And I turned around and looked, and there was the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. And somebody said, room 10 hut. Down the center of the aisle he comes. And he's got on his dress blues, and he's got an aide with him. And there's a chair. They put a chair up there on the center of the stage. And so he takes off his blouse, hands it to his aide, and he takes the chair and he turns it around backwards. And he sits there and he straddles it. And he says some Chief of Staff kinds of things. And he talks about how proud we should be that we have been selected to do this and how important it is. And then he said something, he said, does anybody have any questions? And this one guy said, he said, do we know if Gaddafi's asleep in his house tonight? And he said, I have no idea where Colonel Gaddafi is. He said, that's not for you to worry about. You've got your targets. You strike your targets. By the way, his house was my target. And then another guy, Fernando Ribas Dominici from Puerto Rico, who's the left seater of the air crew we lost. He said, are we going to go back? Meaning do another strike, or is this a one-time thing? And John Gabriel said, it depends on how well of a job you guys do tonight. And then he said, just remember this. He said, this will be the first time that the United States Air Force ever went to war with America looking over its shoulder. He said, don't screw this up. And you go, oh, like that, you know.
No pressure. Huh?
No pressure, as if there was none. But anyway, we got ready to go, got in our airplanes, and there was a set time that you start engines. There was a certain time that you taxied, and they had prearranged the airplanes so that when you taxied out, you were in the right order. And so taxied down and went through the quick check area, which is where they check the airplane over to make sure that it's good. They arm the bombs, not arm the bombs, but they remove the pins that prevent you, the air crew, from dropping the bombs. Prevents an inadvertent release on the ground. So you put your hands up on the glare shield and they take the pins out. And your hands are up there so that if there is a bomb that falls, then it's something other than you. So you put your hands up there. And when the army crew comes out from both sides, they got the pins, they show them to you. You give them the thumbs up. The crew chief says, sir, you're good to go. You're on intercom. And so you pull out the end of the runway and you sit there and you wait. I'm the first one at the runway right there. There had been some other airplanes that had taken off from the other side already because they were going to go all the way around. I was going to fly most direct route, so those airplanes had to be in front. And so they had taken off. And so I'm sitting there waiting until it's time for me to pull on the runway. And so I pull out on the runway with a flight of 4, and I'm looking for a light from mobile control there at the end of the runway. And as soon as I get the light from the end of the mobile, I punch clock in the airplane, and I wait for the allotted time. And at the allotted time, I go into burner, release my brakes. The allotted time is because I get the green light when the tanker starts rolling. My tanker starts rolling from Mildenhall Base about 6 miles away. And he's going to fly a SID, a standard instrument departure. Then I'm going to take off, and I'm going to fly a much shorter SID, and I'm going to join on him. And then I'm going to join on that tanker with my flight of 4, and I'm going to stay with that tanker all the way to Libya and back. So I waited the allotted time, go into afterburner, release the brakes, and I take off. I'm in the clouds, in the weather like you always are in the UK, and I'm flying, and I make my turn, and now my tanker is over here to my left, several miles away. I can't see him, but we're converging to the same spot, and passing about 14 or 15,000 feet, why I break out of the clouds, and I look over, and there's my tanker. And rejoin on the tanker, and it went just exactly the way it's supposed to happen. The rest of the airplanes take off, all join on their tanker, and now we head out towards Land's End. We get out over the Atlantic Ocean, and each one of us plugs into our tanker to make sure the refueling system worked, all 4 airplanes. One of them is a spare, and he's supposed to spare one of the other three airplanes in the flight. And all 4 airplanes refuel, and it's all systems. And then we go at a predetermined time. We go over to a secure radio frequency, and I check in all the airplanes. Every airplane checks in with their status. And there were a couple of airplanes that had a problem. One of them couldn't get an afterburner to light on takeoff. It wasn't mission critical that it works, but it was an airplane that had something wrong. Oh, by the way, the pilot of that airplane was Muddy Waters, one of the primary attackers. And so I'm sitting there in the cockpit, and I'm thinking, do I send Muddy back? He can fly this mission easily. And I know he's sitting there saying, boss, don't send me back. Don't send me back. But Muddy had to say something. I mean, he could have sat there and said, my airplane's good. But no, he said, I can't get my left afterburner to light on takeoff. He took off without it, no problem. Okay, he's going back. So I sent 2 airplanes back. So those 2 airplanes were filled by spares, and then those 6 airplanes turned around and went back to Lakenheath. And then we fly down to the Mediterranean, refueling along the way. I remember looking back, and all I could see was KC-10s refueling F-111s, KC-10s refueling KC-10s. It's a big armada of airplanes. The reason that's important is much later, a very famed artist was commissioned to paint a painting, a mural of the Libya raid, and he came to Lakenheath and told me to close my eyes. His name's Keith Ferris. If you've ever visited the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and you see a big mural up there that shows what it looks like in front of B-17s bombing Germany, Keith Ferris painted that mural on the wall. So he was going to paint this. And so he came to the squadron, and he took me back into a briefing room. He said, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to tell me what you see. What's the most iconic thing you remember about the raid? And I said, well, the thing I remember most is coming dark. I'm at TFR. I'm coming across the coast of Libya, getting ready to strike my target, and the lights are all on the city, and I see vehicles going up and down the road as I pass. That's the most iconic. But I said, that doesn't make a good painting. And he said, why? And I said, because it's too dark. You can't see. All you see is lights. And he said, well, give me another scene. And I said, well, I'm out over the Atlantic. I said, the sun is setting in the west. there's puffy clouds below us. They got a pinkish cast to them. And I look back and I see KC-10s refueling KC-10s, KC-10s refueling F-111s. And he's sitting there with a legal pad, just legal pad. And he turns it sideways. And I'm saying this, and he's over here and he's doing this. He's doing this. And after just a couple of minutes, he said, "Did it look like this?" And I thought to myself, my God, he was there. I mean, that's the way an artist can do. And I said, "Yes, sir, that's it." And after I left Lakenheath, fast forward, I left Lakenheath, and I go back to the Pentagon where I'm assigned, and they're hanging in the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, hanging on the wall in his outer office is this mural that says "The Lesson." And it's that figure, that view that I had told Keith Ferris. And in the mail, I get a printed copy, number, I forget what it was, that he had signed, and he sent it to me, and it hangs on my house.
Oh, yeah.
Right now. But they took it out of the chief's office after a while. But anyway, it was hanging on there. But back to the mission. So we go down there, and we fly down, and we start refueling and refueling and refueling. And we get to the tanker track, and each guy has a specific time that he's supposed to strike his target within 15 seconds. Has to be within 15 seconds. If he can't make it within 15 seconds, well, then he has to quit, because he's going to hit somebody else that's in the same general area, because it's at nighttime and we can't see each other. And so you got a 15 seconds. Got a 15-second window. 15 seconds early, 15 seconds late, no more. And so there's a point at which you need to leave the tanker to make that time. So now I've got my 3 airplanes up there, and so we start refueling. Rotating through, because I wanted each one of us to have as much gas in our airplane when we dropped off the tanker as we possibly could. So we started, I'd go in there and I'd get refuel, I'd get 1,000 pounds, get out of the way. Next guy would get 1,000 pounds, he'd get out of the way. And we did that, and I did it a couple of 3 times. And then when it came to the time, the right seater had the clock, and he said, "Okay, we need to go now." And so I departed the tanker. Now we're on our own, turn the lights off. We go to the descent point, drop down to TFR using automatic terrain following radar out over the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. We fly in at 1,000 feet. Now I got to drop down to 750 feet to keep them from seeing me with their radar line of sight. And then we drop down to as low as 400 feet. And now I'm at 400 feet. And I'm going to come in at 400 feet. I don't want to be any lower than that, because there are towers along the coastline that I'll hit. But I start getting hits on the airplane from this Crotel. It's a French-built system. I keep getting hits by this Crotel that's hitting our airplane. He's looking for me. And so I paddle off the TFR, and I fly the airplane down to 200 feet over the water. Can't see anything. All I'm doing is flying off my radar altimeter. I can see the coastline coming up, but I'm holding the TFR with my finger, disconnected the TFR. I select 300 feet on the set clearance plane, and now we're coming up on the coast, and so I release. The airplane comes up. They're shooting. Their missiles are shooting. I come up to 300 feet. I cross the coast at 300 feet on automatic terrain following radar. My right seater has seen with his radar, has seen the offset aim points, and we're going to do a toss maneuver. At 25,000 feet from the target, I'm going to aggressively pull my airplane up into about a 45-degree pitch attitude. And at the computer, at the designated release point, it'll release them. The bombs are now ballistic. This is the bombs, 4 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs. They apex, and then they come back down, and now with their seeker head, they're looking for this spot on the ground.
And the Libyans know you're here.
Say again?
The Libyans know you're there.
Oh, they know we're there. They know we're there. And so the bombs are doing this, and while the bombs are doing that, as soon as the bombs come off the airplane, I turn up to 135 degrees of bank, turn upside down, and I pull, and I'm turning, and I pull the nose down to the horizon. And then when I get to the horizon, I roll out to 90 degrees of bank, and now I continue the pull. and I'm pulling around, and there's a ZSU 23-4, which is a 4-barrel AAA gun down there, and he's just hosing the far out of me. And he's not giving me enough lead because I'm going too fast. He's behind me. I can see the tracers.
So he's just missing you. You're outrunning him.
I'm out. He's not pulling enough lead.
Yeah.
And so I'm afraid he's going to hit me. And so I reach down, and we got a switch right here where you can either drop flares or chaff, which are loaded on the back of the airplane. And I don't know whether he's radar guided or not. And so I'm going to drop a bundle of chaff. Blows out behind the airplane, the chaff explodes, and now his radar will track that instead of me. But in the process, I hit the switch the wrong way, and a flare comes out. A flare comes out of the airplane and explodes and burns really hot in case it's an IR missile or something that's after you. And you listen to the audio. By the way, the audio was in the airplane, so it recorded everything that every one of the airplanes said and what the right seater saw in his radar scope. But when I listened to the audio of the airplane that was behind me, he says, "They got the boss." Because he saw this flash, and it's right behind my airplane, and he thought I got hit.
Yeah.
And he said, "They got the boss." But they didn't get the boss. But I'm pulling, and I'm pulling, and I'm pulling, and my right, and I'm calling out the seconds to impact. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, impact. And I'm pulling real hard because this guy is hosing me, and I'm trying to get away, and the right seater says to me, Gurney says, "You pull too hard." And what happened is the back of the airplane got between the laser and the target, and when it does, it shuts off the laser so the laser won't hit the airplane. And the last thing you can see in his scope, just before the bombs exploded, the building is right there, and the bombs are going to hit it, and it clicks off about a second to impact, and now the bombs don't have any more guidance, and they go ballistic. So instead of all of them hitting the building, they drop out in the front yard and do terrible damage, just destroyed the building, but they didn't hit the building. Made 80-foot swimming pools, but it blew up the house, the building. And now I'm out here. TFR is back down to 200 feet. Now we're going north. As soon as we cross the coast, get feet wet out over the water, why I drop it down to, I was at 300 feet. I drop it down to 200 feet, and we're going northbound as fast as I can get the airplane to go in military power. I didn't go to afterburner because then they can see you. And the plan is there was a specific boat out there. We called it the D-Louse ship. And it was a special Navy boat that we were going to go right by. And if there were a Libyan fighter chasing us out, he was going to strip him off. Hence the term, the D-Louse boat. And so I can remember the right seater had the coordinates for where the boat was supposed to be, and it was there. And I didn't want to fly directly over the boat because I worried about a boat commander with this target coming directly at him at 600 knots or whatever the speed was, and he's getting real nervous. So I was going to offset some, so I didn't fly right over the boat. So I did. I offset, and we flew past the boat, but nobody was chasing us. The Libyans, as it turned out, they fired a lot of missiles. They fired a lot of AAA, but there was a call made to the squadron that were the night fighters, and they told them, call somebody else. They didn't launch. So the Libyans didn't launch any fighters that night, but they did shoot a lot. As I'm coasting out, I'm at 200 feet. As I'm going out, I look at about my 1030 position in my peripheral vision, and there's this bright light, and I looked, and I said over my audio, it's on our tape, somebody just hit the water. I had seen lots of napalm dropped when I was in Vietnam. And it has a unique signature, what it looks like as it splashes, and then spreads out. And I saw it. It was a very shallow impact, and it was smeared across the water like an airplane had impacted and was broken up and smeared across the water. And I said, somebody just hit the water. Get back up to the tanker, find my tanker, get on the tanker. Start refueling, because as soon as I get there, I start refueling, and they pumped gas in me until my number 2 man showed up. And when the number 2 man showed up, I got off the tank, got over on the wing, he got under, he started refueling until number 3 showed up. Then he got out of the way, and number 3 refueled. And that's the way it went with all the tankers. And so then they did we were on the tankers, and so then they did a radio check. And remit 52 didn't check in. And so they did another radio check. And remit 52 didn't check in. And Tony Sobel, one of the guys in my flight, Tony Sobel, who had seen the same thing that I had seen, he said, I don't think he made it. And so we stood around, circled around a little bit longer in the hopes that he would show up, did another radio check, as I recall. And then the Armada flew back to Lakenheath. When I went down the Atlantic Ocean, the sun was setting in the west, and when I came back up the Atlantic, the sun was rising in the east. It had been all night. The air crews were given a chance before we launched. The deal was, this is the conversation. Sam Westbrook told me later they were trying to decide whether the air crews were going to be allowed to tell their family what it is they were going to go do. And so the discussion went something like this. Well, if they tell their wife, and then the wife calls home and says, be sure and watch TV Monday, because this is going to happen, and Sam is going to be part of that. Or we tell them, you can't tell your wife, and then something happens, and the guy's lost, and he didn't get to say the last thing, whatever he wanted to say to his wife. That's a tough decision. Yeah. And so the decision was the air crews are going to be allowed to tell their family if that's what they want to do. The air crew can go home. This is the night before, if they want to. Although there is rooms set aside in the queue in the officers' quarters if they want to spend the night here and not go home. Some guys stayed. Some guys told their wife. I didn't tell my wife because I didn't want her to worry. We're flying back, and my right seater says, pull up your HF button. High frequency button on my intercom, because I don't listen to that. And I pulled it up, and here was Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, giving a press conference in front of the Pentagon, telling them that what we had just done, including F-111s from RAF Lakenheath. Well, my daughter's in the States, in college. Our daughter is in the States, in college, in Bowling Green, going to Western. She sees it. She's staying at my mom's house. We called it a halfway house because she had been raised in the UK, so she was going to spend a semester with my mom. And she called my mom. Well, it's 2 o'clock in the morning at Lakenheath. And she said, Mom, where's Dad? And my wife said, well, he's at the squadron. They're having an exercise. Right. And Monica says, well, I just saw on TV where F-111s from Lakenheath just bombed Libya, knowing Dad, that's where he is. And Mickey said, well, now Monica, you know, if he was going to go do something like that, he'd tell me. And she said, and he didn't say anything. She said, I'm going to call the squadron, and then I'll call you back. So they hung up, and she called the squadron. And Dan was there, my operations officer. And she said, can I speak with Arnie? And he said, well, he's not here. Where is he? And Dan said, well, he didn't tell you where he was going. And Mickey said, no. And Dan said, well, they struck Libya, and said that's where he is. And Mickey said, well, there's an airplane missing. And Dan said, well, I don't know anything about that, which is true, because they didn't know anything about it at Lakenheath. There's an airplane missing. And Dan said, well, I don't know anything about that, and I won't know for 6 hours. I won't know till tomorrow morning, later on. When he gets back, I'll hear him on the radio, and I'll recognize his voice, and I'll call you and tell you that he's back. And Mickey said, okay. And so she called back to Monica, and she said, that's where he is. And I won't know until for about 6 hours whether that's him or not.
So they didn't know if their dad or their husband were gone. Yeah.
And so when I give my Libya brief, which I do about this, I say, you know, and my mom spent 6 hours on her knees beside her bed, not knowing. And so we talk a lot about the stress that we put on the military members. We talk a lot about the things they do, what they have to put up with. But we don't spend a lot of time talking about the families.
Families, yeah.
And they're under as much stress as the guys in combat because they don't know. We move them around everywhere. We put them under a lot of stress. And so we need to make sure that we do a better job of that. So anyway, that was, 6 hours later, Dan hears me on the radio and he calls me and says, okay, he's back. So she calls Monica and says, okay, he's back. So everything was good. But we flew all the way back to Lakenheath and we landed. And as soon as we land, they take us into the squadron and the chief of staff is still there. And they take the video that we have and he wants to watch each one of them. And so he watched mine and he said to somebody, I want that one. And I didn't stay around and listen to what he said, but he pulled 2 or 3, obviously. And they spliced it together and made a video for him. And he gets on the airplane, and I see a picture, and I think it's either Newsweek or Time Magazine. And here's General Gabriel, Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. The president is sitting at a table, and they're looking at a video, and he's pointing out, and it's the video that he had taken of us there. And so anyway, everything goes back to normal there at Lakenheath, other than we've lost an air crew. So we had a memorial service for Fernando Rivas and Paul Lawrence. They made no radio call. I was close enough to them that if they'd made a radio call on the strike frequency or on guard, the guard channel that everybody listens to, I would have heard it. But nobody heard it. We were several airplanes, nobody heard it. So he made no radio call. I don't know why he hit the water. We won't know until we're able to get there and get the access to the crash site and see. There's theory that he received ground fire and the airplane was disabled and he ejected. If that's true, then the module is separated from the airplane. I didn't see the rocket motor from the module. I just saw the airplane hit the water. So he could have flown the airplane into the water, avoiding what he perceived to be a missile after him, which would have been his fault. He could have, we were very low, very high speed, so seconds from impacting the water all the time, seconds. So he could hit the water. Got the airplane banked up too high, got down too low, hit the water. He could have been hit by a missile and disabled the airplane and he hit the water. Something could have happened to him. I mean, he could have, I don't know, and just hit the water. I don't know we won't know what happened to him. But I do know that a body washed up on shore sometime later, and a helmet. And all of our helmets had our names embossed on the back of them. So Franklin was on the back of my helmet. But a helmet of Paul Lawrence washed up on shore, and the body. And so they immediately put 2 and 2 together and got 5 and said that this was Paul Lawrence that washed up on shore. But this time, fast forward, I'm at the Pentagon, my next assignment. And one day I got a call to report to this room down in the basement. And I went down and there was guys in civilian clothes. I didn't know who they were. But they said, have a seat, we want you to look at something. And I sat there. And it was the video that the Libyans had published. I had never seen it. I don't think it was shown in the States. But it was the body washed up on shore. In a flight suit, the body was bloated. I had a very bad scar on this side of his face. It was a big gash right here. Some money was laying there on top of it. And they said, who is this? And told me what it was. And they said, can you tell if it's Fernando or Paul? And the body was large. It was bloated. It was white. And I said, I can't tell. I can't tell which one it is. Show it to me again. And they did. And I looked and looked and looked. And I said, if I had to say, I would say it's Fernando. But I can't be sure. And the guy said, he said, your ear is cartilage, and he said it doesn't change. It doesn't get bloated. It's the same. He said, if we could just, we don't have a official picture that shows Fernando's right ear, because the way, or it was the left one, I forget which. I said, let me look through my pictures. And I said, by the way, I said, that scar on his face looks like a G-suit zipper. And one of the guys says, what's a G-suit? And I said, I explained what a G-suit was. I said, it's a garment we put on to, it inflates and keeps us, the blood in our head, in our brain, eyes, when we pull high G's. I said, I got one at home. And he said, bring it in. So the next day I brought it in and I put it on. And I sat in the chair and I said, see this curve in the knee right here? I said, that's exactly like that curve right there. And I said, it looks to me like, whatever reason, when the capsule hit the water, his head went forward hard enough that there's a big gash on his face from hitting the stick as it went down, and his head hit his leg, or his leg came up and hit his face so hard it put that zipper mark in his face. And that's exactly what it is. Long story is that the next year, I believe it was, or maybe the year after, the body was released to the National Red Cross and brought back, and they were able to determine 100% that it was in fact Fernando Rivas and not Paul Lawrence. So we've got Fernando's bodies back, and he's buried down in Puerto Rico. And if you land in Puerto Rico today, you land at the Fernando Rivas Dominici National Airport. And the road there is named after him. But we've not heard or seen, even to this day, anything about Paul Lawrence's body. So
I guess maybe through all this interview, what would you like most what would you most like for the people that's going to watch this? What would the most important thing for you to have them to say about this interview?
About the mission, or about this interview?
About your service, or you'd want them to think about?
Well, I think this is a great thing that you're doing, because there are lots of people that have stories, and those stories go untold. In many cases, the families don't even know, because the veteran doesn't share, especially if it's close to the time he served, and he served in a combat situation. Like I said earlier, I didn't serve with the Army. I know that there's things that they don't want, things that they went through that they don't want to talk about. I've shared all that I've told you, all with my family, so they know. But there are lots of us that this may be the only opportunity for there to be any record of their experience, of what they went through. And so I think it's a wonderful thing. It's a shame that you can't relive your, in my case, 30-year career in a short video. It's hard to encapsulate everything, because we've talked about just a very short part of the period that I served in the military. But that's the only part we've talked about.
I guess in closing, I just wanted you to anything that you wanted to tell the people watching this, what you most wanted them to know.
I was proud to serve my country. After I retired, I wanted to be a fighter pilot and a high school teacher, and I did both. I was a fighter pilot for 30 years. I served 30 years in the Air Force, a couple of months short. Taught high school for 10 years, and teachers there at Warren East High School, none of them had ever served in the military, and they said, they'd asked me. I was the first military person they'd ever talked to. What was it like? Did you ever get shot at? Did you ever shoot somebody? Those kinds of questions. And they said, would you like to go back? I said, I could be any place in the United States tomorrow to be back in. I could be anywhere in the world in 3 days to serve. I said, I can't think of a better thing that I would have liked to have done with my life more than serve my country. And that's what I did.
Yeah, well, I just want to appreciate your time and you talking to me. It was an honor to interview, and I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.